My name is Victoria Ashford, and I'm 38 years old. On what should have been the celebration of our 10th wedding anniversary, my husband Marcus stood in front of 200 guests at the luxury gala we'd planned for months, and said the words that would change everything. I wish I'd neverthing. Married you. He didn't whisper it. Didn't pull me aside privately. He looked directly into my eyes, in front of his business partners, our friends, our families, and delivered that sentence like he'd been waiting years to say it out loud. The room went silent. Some people gasped. Others looked away, embarrassed for me. Something inside me shattered in that moment. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly. For years. What shattered was the last piece of hope I'd been clinging to, that our marriage could be saved. That the man I'd built an empire with still valued me. That I mattered to him as anything more than a trophy he'd grown tired of displaying. The next morning I didn't argue with him. Didn't cry or beg for explanations. I packed my essentials, emptied our joint accounts, initiated the sale of our properties, transferred assets I'd quietly been securing for months, and disappeared. By the time Marcus woke up and realized what I'd done, I was on a plane to Singapore with $8 million, a new company registered in my name alone, and a lawyer who specialized in making powerful men regret underestimating their wives. Before I tell you how I went from being humiliated at my own anniversary party to building a business empire that made my husband's company look like a lemonade stand, I need you to do something. If you've ever been publicly humiliated by someone who is supposed to love you, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and the moment you realized your relationship was over. Your stories fuel my courage. Now let me take you back to the beginning of the end. I met Marcus Ashford when I was 26 years old. I'd just finished my MBA and was working as a consultant for tech startups. He was 32, a rising entrepreneur in the financial technology sector, charming and ambitious. We met at an industry conference where I was presenting a strategy paper on emerging markets. He approached me after my presentation, champagne in hand, with the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "That was brilliant," he said. "The Asia-Pacific expansion model you outlined could revolutionize how we think about fintech penetration in developing markets." We talked for 3 hours. About business, about vision, about the future we both saw coming. He was smart, driven, and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas. Within 2 months, we were dating. Within 6 months he'd asked me to join his company as Chief Strategy Officer. "I need someone with your brain," he said. "Someone who sees what I see. We could build something incredible together." I should have paid more attention to that phrasing. Not "you're incredible, but we could build something incredible." The value was always in what I could do for him, not in who I was. But I was young and ambitious and in love. So I said yes to the job. And 6 months later, to his marriage proposal. We got married in a ceremony that was featured in Business Insider and Forbes. Power couple alert, tech entrepreneur marries strategy genius. That's what the headline read. I remember feeling proud of that, like I'd achieved something. By being recognized as his equal. I should have noticed that even in our wedding announcement, his name came first. His company was the main focus. My accomplishments were mentioned only in context of how they supported his vision. But I didn't notice. Or I did and told myself it didn't matter. Because we were building something together. Ashford Financial Technologies, the company that would change how emerging markets accessed capital. I threw myself into the work. Developed partnerships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Created the frameworks that allowed us to scale rapidly. Built the relationships with regulatory bodies that let us operate in 12 countries within 3 years. The company grew from $8 million in valuation when I joined, to $80 million within 2 years, then to $300 million. By our 5th anniversary, Ashford Financial Technologies was valued at $1.2 billion. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being Marcus's partner and became his employee. His possession. His secret weapon that he took credit for while simultaneously diminishing. Victoria restructured our Asia operations, he'd say to investors, then immediately follow with, "But the vision was always mine." She just executed what I designed. My strategies became our approach. My relationships became connections I facilitated. My innovations became ideas we developed together. In public, he called me his partner. In private board meetings, he introduced me as my wife who helps with strategy. The distinction was subtle but devastating. By our 7th anniversary, I was doing 80-hour weeks, managing partnerships in 16 countries, and bringing in 60% of our revenue. Marcus was doing interviews, attending conferences, and taking credit for building a billion-dollar company. When reporters asked about my role, he'd smile and say, "Victoria's brilliant. But she'll tell you herself. She couldn't have done any of this without the platform I created. She's exceptional at execution." Execution. Like I was a tool he wielded rather than the architect of our success. I started keeping records, documenting my contributions. Not because I planned to leave, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining my own erasure. Email threads showing my strategic plans. Meeting notes where I'd proposed initiatives that Marcus later presented as his ideas. Revenue reports showing which partnerships I'd brought in versus which he had. The data was undeniable. I was responsible for 73% of our company's growth. I'd brought in 81% of our international partnerships. I'd designed 92% of our operational frameworks. But Marcus was the CEO. Marcus was the face of the company. Marcus was the billionaire entrepreneur featured in magazines. I was the wife who supported his vision. Our marriage deteriorated in parallel with my professional diminishment. The man who'd once stayed up all night discussing strategy with me now came home and complained that I worked too much. The person who'd said he valued my mind now suggested I should relax more and not be so intense about everything. "You're not fun anymore," he said during our 8th anniversary dinner. Just the two of us at an expensive restaurant where he spent most of the meal on his phone. "I'm tired," I replied. "I've been managing the Singapore expansion alone while you've been on the speaking circuit. The speaking circuit builds our brand. My work builds our revenue. Don't be bitter, Victoria. It's not a good look." That should have been my wake-up call. But I still believed we were partners. Still thought that if I just worked harder, contributed more, proved my value more definitively, he'd see me again the way he did when we first met. I was wrong. The shift happened about 18 months ago. Marcus hired an executive assistant named Sienna. 26 years old, fresh from an Ivy League MBA program, ambitious and beautiful. He introduced her as someone who would help with scheduling and coordination. Within 3 months, she was attending strategy meetings. Within 6 months, she was presenting ideas in board meetings, ideas that sounded suspiciously like proposals I'd mentioned casually in conversations with Marcus. I watched it happen in real time. The same pattern I'd experienced, but accelerated. Marcus was grooming his next strategic mind. Someone younger, more impressed by him, less likely to question when he took credit for her work. When I mentioned my concerns to Marcus, he laughed. "Are you jealous of my assistant? That's beneath you, Victoria. I'm not jealous. I'm concerned that she's presenting strategy work that's remarkably similar to proposals I made months ago. Maybe great minds think alike. Or maybe you're not as original as you think you are." That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, I'd hired a forensic accountant and a divorce attorney. Not because I was ready to leave, but because I needed to know what I'd be walking away from if I did. I needed to understand the financial reality of our marriage and our business. What I discovered shocked me. The company we'd built together was structured in a way that gave Marcus 90% ownership and me 10%. Despite my contributions, despite my documented role in the company's growth, I legally owned almost nothing. Our prenuptial agreement, which I'd signed without much thought because I'd been in love and trusting, gave me minimal rights to marital assets acquired during the marriage. The house, the investment accounts, even the vacation property in Aspen, all technically belonged to Marcus through various legal structures I hadn't paid attention to when they were created. If I divorced him tomorrow, I'd walk away with maybe $10 million. A fortune to most people. Action of what I'd actually built. The forensic accountant gave me a detailed report. "Mrs. Ashford, based on your documented contributions, you should own at least 40% of this company. The way it's currently structured, you've essentially been working to build your husband's wealth while securing almost nothing for yourself." I sat in that lawyer's office, looking at spreadsheets and legal documents, and realized I'd been played. Systematically, deliberately played by a man I trusted completely. That's when I started planning. Not emotionally. Not reactively. Strategically. The same way I'd planned every successful business expansion I'd ever executed. First, I secured what I could. I had 10% of the company, But I also had control of several key international partnerships that were registered through subsidiaries I'd structured. Legally, those relationships were mine. The contracts were in my name. The regulatory approvals in various countries listed me as the primary relationship holder. I quietly began transferring those partnerships to a new holding company I registered in Singapore. Legally. Carefully. Everything documented and legitimate. Second, I built leverage. I compiled comprehensive evidence of my contributions. Every strategy document I'd created. Every email showing my ideas being presented as ours. Every revenue report showing which partnerships I'd built. Every piece of intellectual property I'd developed. I didn't plan to use it vindictively, but I needed Marcus to understand that if he wanted to minimize my contributions publicly, I could prove otherwise very publicly. Third, I secured my finances. Our joint accounts held about $12 million. Legally, I had access to half. I also had access to credit lines associated with my company ownership and personal assets. I began quietly moving money into accounts he didn't monitor closely, building a financial foundation I could stand on independently. I did all of this carefully, methodically, over the course of 8 months. Not because I was definitely leaving, but because I needed to know I could. Then came our 10th anniversary. Marcus insisted on a huge celebration. A gala at the St. Regis. 200 guests. Business partners, investors, friends, family. He hired an event planner who designed something that looked more like a corporate networking event than a marriage celebration. "This is about showing everyone how successful we are," he said when I questioned the guest list. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of building an empire. It's a power move. I went along with it. Bought an expensive dress. Smiled for the photographer. Played the role of the successful wife supporting her even more successful husband. The evening started normally. Cocktails, dinner, speeches. Marcus gave a long toast about our marriage and our business. He talked about the challenges we'd overcome, the vision he'd had, the company he'd built. He mentioned me twice. Both times in passing. And of course, Victoria has been supportive throughout this journey. Supportive? Like I'd been cheering from the sidelines rather than building the foundation he stood on. Then, during the dessert course, something shifted. Marcus had been drinking steadily throughout the evening. His face was flushed. His eyes had that glassy look that meant he was past tipsy and into drunk. He stood up, slightly unsteadily, and called for attention. "I want to make another toast," he announced. "A more honest one." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. I'd heard it before during late-night arguments when he'd had too much to drink and his filters disappeared. 10 years ago I married Victoria because I thought she was brilliant. And she is brilliant. Brilliant at execution. Brilliant at following directions. Brilliant at making my vision reality. The room was quiet. People were smiling uncertainly, not sure if this was leading somewhere good or somewhere uncomfortable. But you know what I've realized over 10 years? She's not a builder. She's a maintainer. I build. She maintains. I innovate. She implements. And honestly, he turned to look directly at me. "I wish I'd never married you." The room froze. Someone gasped. Marcus's mother started to stand up. I sat completely still, my champagne glass halfway to my lips. "I wish I'd married someone who challenged me," he continued, emboldened by the shock and the alcohol. "Someone who brought vision, not just execution. Someone who was a real partner, not just someone who does what I tell her to do really well." He raised his glass. "To honesty. And to the next 10 years, which I hope look very different from the last 10. He drank. Most people didn't. They sat in horrified silence. I set down my champagne glass carefully. Stood up. Looked at Marcus, at the 200 people watching this train wreck, at the elaborate celebration of a marriage that had just been publicly declared a mistake. "Thank you for your honesty," I said calmly. "It clarifies things considerably." I picked up my clutch. Walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard commotion. Marcus calling my name. His mother's voice raised in anger. Someone sobbing? Probably my mother. I kept walking. I went home to our penthouse. Not to pack, not yet. To sit in the silence and let the full weight of what had just happened settle over me. My husband had just told 200 people he wished he'd never married me. had called me an implementer, not a builder, had publicly diminished 10 years of my work, my contributions, my partnership. In that moment, sitting in our expensive penthouse that I'd helped buy, I felt something unexpected: freedom. Because Marcus had just freed me. From guilt about leaving. From any obligation to try to save our marriage. From any concern about being fair or generous or kind in how I extracted myself from this relationship. He'd given me permission, in front of witnesses, to walk away without looking back. I spent that night executing what I'd been planning for months. I contacted my lawyer. Initiated transfer of the partnerships I controlled to my Singapore holding company. Began liquidation of my portion of our joint assets. Transferred accessible funds to accounts he couldn't touch. By dawn I'd moved $8 million, secured legal control of partnerships worth $15 million annually in revenue, and filed preliminary paperwork for a separation agreement. I had packed 2 suitcases. Not sentimentally, just essentials and important documents. The prenup I'd signed 10 years ago. The evidence files documenting my contributions. The contracts showing my partnerships. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter next to a note. You wished you'd never married me. Consider that wish granted. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, and so will access to everything I built. You wanted honesty. Here it is. I was never just an implementer. I was the architect. And now I'm taking my blueprints elsewhere. Don't contact me. Your lawyers can speak to mine. I was on a plane to Singapore by 8 a.m. Marcus didn't even know I was gone until noon when he finally woke up hungover and found my note. The text messages started immediately. Then the calls. Then the emails. Victoria, where are you? We need to talk about last night. I was drunk. I didn't mean those things. This is crazy. Come home so we can discuss this like adults. You can't just leave. We have a company to run. You're overreacting. It was one stupid comment. I didn't respond to any of them. His tone shifted by evening. Victoria, I'm looking at our accounts. What the fuck did you do? You transferred the Asia partnerships? That's theft. I'm calling my lawyers. You can't take company assets. My lawyer responded on my behalf. Mrs. Ashford has secured only assets she legally controls and funds she legally has access to. All actions taken were within her rights as part owner of specified partnerships and joint account holder. If Mr. Ashford has concerns about the division of marital assets, he can address them through the formal separation process Mrs. Ashford has initiated. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. Marcus tried everything. Claimed I'd stolen company secrets. Argued that the partnerships I'd transferred belonged to Ashford Financial. Insisted I was obligated to return his money. Every claim fell apart under scrutiny. The partnerships were registered in my name. I'd negotiated them. I maintained the relationships. The contracts explicitly named me, not the company. Legally they were mine. The money I'd transferred was from joint accounts I had every right to access. Nothing I'd done was illegal. The prenup he'd insisted on 10 years ago, designed to protect his assets, had specific language about the division of marital property. But it didn't account for assets I'd developed independently, or partnerships I'd structured under my own name. Marcus's lawyers finally admitted what mine had known from the beginning. I hadn't stolen anything. I'd just stopped giving him free access to what I'd built. 3 months after I left, we reached a settlement. I kept the partnerships I'd transferred, worth approximately $15 million annually in revenue. I received $8 million from our marital assets. I retained my 10% of Ashford Financial, which I immediately sold back to Marcus for $12 million. Total haul, $35 million in immediate assets, plus ongoing revenue from partnerships that were entirely mine. Marcus kept the company, the penthouse, the Aspen property. But he lost the partnerships that generated 60% of his international revenue. And he lost the strategic mind that had built most of his empire. I stayed in Singapore. Used my partnerships as the foundation for a new company, Ashford Global Strategies. Named it that deliberately. Because I was still in Ashford, and I wanted everyone to know where the real strategic value had always been. Within 6 months, I'd expanded my partnership network from 12 countries to 23. Within a year, I'd built Ashford Global Strategies into a consultancy worth $40 million. Within 18 months, I'd been featured in Fortune and Forbes, not as someone's wife, but as a strategic advisor whose client list included governments and Fortune 500 companies. The articles didn't mention Marcus except in passing. Victoria Ashford, formerly of Ashford Financial Technologies, has built a consultancy empire that's become the go-to resource for companies expanding into emerging markets. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus struggled after I left. The Asia partnerships I'd taken with me were his highest margin revenue streams. Without them, and without my strategic direction, Ashford Financial's growth stalled. He tried to rebuild what I'd created, hired consultants who couldn't replicate my relationships, pursued partnerships in countries where I'd built the regulatory frameworks and maintained the personal connections. His company didn't collapse, but it didn't grow either. The billion-dollar valuation started to slip. 800 million. 600 million. Investors got nervous. I didn't take pleasure in his struggles. Honestly, I barely thought about him. I was too busy building something better. A year after I left, I was in Singapore attending a conference on emerging market strategies when I saw him. Marcus, there for the same conference, looking older and tired. We ended up in the same elevator by accident. Just the two of us. He looked at me, I looked at him. The silence was heavy with everything unsaid. "You look good," he said finally. "Success suits you. Thank you. I'm sorry. For what I said that night. For how I treated you. For not seeing what you were really contributing until you were gone." I considered his apology. It sounded genuine. But it also came after I'd proven my worth independently. After he'd experienced the consequences of losing me. After I didn't need his validation anymore. "I appreciate that," I said. "But, Marcus, you didn't suddenly stop seeing my contributions when you got drunk at our anniversary. You stopped seeing them years before that. That night just made it public." "I know. Well, I know. I was threatened by how good you were. How much you accomplished. It felt like you were overshadowing me in my own company. It was our company. But you never actually believed that." The elevator reached his floor. "For what it's worth," he said as the doors opened, "you were right. You weren't just an implementer, you were the architect, and I was too insecure to admit it." He stepped out. The doors closed. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. 2 years after I left, Ashford Global Strategies was valued at $85 million. I'd expanded to 31 countries. I'd been appointed to advisory boards for international development organizations. I delivered keynote speeches at Davos and TED. I was no longer defined by who I'd been married to. I was recognized for what I'd built alone. I hired a team of brilliant strategists, most of them women who'd been overlooked at bigger firms. We created a company culture where ideas were credited to their creators, where strategy and execution were both valued, where partnerships were real rather than performative. We became known as the firm that did what everyone else claimed was impossible. Opening markets that seemed closed. Building relationships that seemed unattainable. Creating frameworks that revolutionized how companies approached expansion. And I did it all without anyone's permission. Without anyone telling me I was just executing their vision. Without anyone diminishing my contributions to elevate themselves. Marcus's company eventually stabilized. He found new partnerships, though none as profitable as what I'd built. He married Sienna, his former assistant. I heard she was brilliant at execution. I didn't remarry. Didn't date seriously. I focused on building something that was entirely mine. Something no one could take credit for. Something that would exist regardless of whether anyone valued my contributions because I valued them myself. 3 years after that terrible anniversary party, I received an invitation. Marcus and Sienna were cows. Having a big celebration for the acquisition of a new partnership, one they'd managed to secure after 2 years of negotiation. I sent a polite decline. But I also sent a gift. A watch. Expensive, elegant. Engraved on the back, to Marcus. Time reveals everything. Victoria, I heard later that he opened it in front of guests and just stared at it for a long time. Then he put it in his pocket and didn't mention it again. A week after that, Sienna called me. We'd never met formally, though I'd watched her rise in Marcus's company from a distance. "Victoria, can we talk? I need advice, from someone who's been where I am." We met for coffee in New York. She looked tired. Successful, beautiful, but tired in a way I recognized. He takes credit for everything, she said without preamble. Every strategy I develop, every relationship I build. It all becomes his vision that I'm executing. And when I mention it, he tells me I'm being too sensitive. How long have you been married? 8 months. And I'm already realizing I might have made a mistake. I looked at this brilliant woman who was experiencing exactly what I had. And I made a choice. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me 10 years ago. Document everything. Your ideas, your contributions, your work. Keep copies of emails, meeting notes, strategy documents. Build your own partnerships that are registered in your name, not the company's. And most importantly, understand your rights legally before you need to exercise them. You're telling me to prepare to leave him. I'm telling you to prepare to protect yourself. Whether you leave or stay, you should know your value and secure it properly. Don't do what I did and wait until you're humiliated publicly to realize you've been building someone else's empire at the expense of your own. She thanked me, hugged me, and left looking determined. 6 months later, I heard she'd started her own consultancy. Left Marcus and Ashford Financial. Took several key partnerships with her, the same way I had. Marcus called me after it happened. Did you tell Sienna to leave me? Did you encourage her to take my partnerships? I told her to value herself properly. What she did with that advice was her choice. You destroyed my second marriage out of spite. No, Marcus. You destroyed your second marriage the same way you destroyed our marriage. By treating brilliant women like tools that existed to make you look good. Sienna just learned faster than I did. He hung up without another word. 4 years after I left, Ashford Global Strategies was acquired by a major multinational consultancy for $120 million. I retained a 20% stake and stayed on as global CEO. My personal net worth exceeded $80 million. I was featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, How Victoria Ashford Built an Empire After Her Public Divorce. The article detailed my journey. The public humiliation. The strategic exit. The company I'd built from partnerships that were legally mine. My current success. It mentioned Marcus only once. Ashford's ex-husband, Marcus Ashford of Ashford Financial Technologies, declined to comment for this article. I framed that magazine cover. Not because I needed validation, but because it represented something important, proof that your value exists whether or not anyone else recognizes it. That you can be diminished, dismissed, publicly humiliated, and still rise. That the best revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you. It's building something so successful they become irrelevant to your story. Last month, I attended a gala for an international development organization I advise. Marcus was there. We'd been seated at tables far apart, but we ended up at the same bar during the cocktail hour. Congratulations on the acquisition, he said. 120 million. That's impressive. Thank you. You did it. Everything you said you could do when we first met. You built something incredible. I did. I wish things had been different between us. I wish I'd valued you properly. I looked at him. At this man I'd once loved. Who'd once believed in my brilliance, even if he couldn't sustain that belief. Who'd helped me become successful, even if he'd resented it. Marcus, I don't wish things had been different. Because if they had been, I might never have learned to value myself. Your public rejection freed me to build something entirely mine. So in a way, that terrible anniversary party was the best thing that ever happened to me. He looked like he might cry. Or maybe like he was finally understanding something he should have understood years ago. I'm glad you're happy, he said finally. I am. I hope you are too. We parted ways. I doubt we'll speak again. We don't need to. That chapter is closed. The marriage that ended in public humiliation. The partnership that was never really equal. The 10 years I spent building someone else's empire. All of it led me here. To the life I have now. The company I built. The reputation I earned. The success that's entirely mine. Your worth is not determined by who claims it or who denies it. Your contributions don't disappear because someone else takes credit. And when someone tells you publicly they wish they'd never married you, believe them, and use that moment as the catalyst to build something they could never imagine. If you made it this far, you understand what it's like to be diminished by someone who was supposed to elevate you. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about women who turned humiliation into empire building. Drop a comment about the moment you realized you were worth more than someone was giving you credit for. Your awakening matters. Hit like if you believe the best revenge is success that makes your detractors irrelevant. And share this with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated is an opportunity, not an endpoint. Remember, the people who wish they'd never married you are usually the ones who can't imagine who you'd become without them. Prove them right by becoming someone they never deserved in the first place. Until next time, this is Victoria reminding you that the greatest gift my husband ever gave me was publicly wishing he'd never married me. Because it freed me to become everything he was too threatened to let me be.